Hello and welcome to the panel at Dublin BIC. My name is Martin Murray and I'm delighted to have with us today Will Parker, Chief Commercial Officer with Safefood 360. Will, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Martin. So,
Will, to begin, can you introduce us please to Safefood 360?
Certainly. So Safefood 360 is a software and services company. We're based in Ballycoolin in West Dublin, not far from the National Aquatic Centre, if you know where that is. We were set up in 2010, and as the name suggests, we work in the area of food safety management. So in technical terms, we're regulatory and compliance software. And we sit within what would be described as the global testing, inspection and certification market, which is a large $22 billion market across the globe.
Very good. And let me just throw in there for transparency purposes, Will, that Dublin BIC is an investor in Safefood 360 through our AIB Seed Capital Fund.
Yes, that's correct, Martin. You're one of our main investors. We raised a little bit of BES money, around €300,000 back in 2010 when we set up. And then we did a funding round led by yourselves, matched by Enterprise Ireland for €500,000 in total back in 2012. So that's really all the money that we've raised to date.
Wow, and you've grown organically apart from that. So tell me, what is the scale of the business now?
Well, at the moment, we have 26 employees based out of our Dublin office. We also have one employee in Pennsylvania in the US, who is our territory manager for that part of the world, which is probably our main market, accounting for 70% of our customers by volume and also by revenue. And we also have a subcontract team of 7 people in Delhi, in India, who do some of our software development. So we do the majority of it in Dublin, but the core application is maintained down in Delhi.
Tell me a little bit more about your customers. What does a typical customer look like for Safefood 360, and what's the geographic spread of those customers?
Right. So we sell to what are called food business operators of all shapes and sizes. Primarily that has sort of channeled down to being food manufacturers, food retailers, and food distributors. What we don't really do is food service, so restaurants. And the reason we don't do that is simply because Safefood is a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut for those type of organizations. So for a retail outlet, i.e. a restaurant, fast food outlet, or a kiosk, they might have perhaps, they might need 1/10 of the programs that we have within Safefood. They are the same programs, but they're a much smaller component of it. And Safefood is unnecessarily large for them. But in the sectors that we do sell to of manufacturing, retail and distribution companies, we probably have a floor level at about maybe €20 million. So for companies smaller than that, it simply doesn't make sense. They probably don't have the budget. They certainly don't necessarily have the people who are in a position to operate a platform such as ours, and they'd be more likely to use paper-based records, Excel, Word, those sort of things. So we started around €20 million, and our biggest customers are in the $30 billion range. So big global businesses with more than 100 locations, warehouses, manufacturing centers, and so on. So it covers the whole gambit. And being a SaaS product, it's one version of the truth. So the great thing is that the smallest company uses exactly the same software as the biggest company, just at a different scale.
Will, you have the very proud position, I believe, of being the first Chief Commercial Officer that we've had on the panel at Dublin BIC. I'm very interested in investigating that role with you. Many of the startup clients of Dublin BIC are not founded by somebody with a deep commercial or sales background. And it is very much part of the challenge for those businesses as to when to take on a chief commercial officer and to figure out what the role of that person should be. So can you tell us today in Safefood 360, what is your role as chief commercial officer?
Okay, so Chief Commercial Officer is primarily focused around sales. So if you look at the trajectory of a startup business, when we started up, it was basically the two founders, and between them, they wrote the product and they sold it. We then started to take on the sales team. And I should say that at that stage, right early on in the company, the role that I had was actually chairman of the board. I was a non-executive chairman. So I was involved in the growth of the business. And finally, in 2016, I came to work full-time for the company myself, and I gave up my other interests. And I've been working at Safefood since then. So if you look at our trajectory, clearly what a company needs as it goes through the growth stage is to ramp up its sales capability. And for that, you basically just need salespeople. However, as you start selling to enterprise customers, the situation arises that you have to start doing a lot more negotiation, and particularly negotiation around legal contracts. So we have a 30-page legal document. It's actually a SaaS agreement, but within that, there's a service level agreement, there's a statement of works, which cover the implementation project that we have to do. And we are negotiating ultimately, initially with the decision makers within the quality and technical areas of our customers. But pretty soon it moves into dealing with the finance people and then the legal people. So quite significant amount of time needs to be invested in making sure that we have a contract that works for both parties. The problem is if you're a 2 or 3 or 4 million euro business and you're dealing with a 2 or 3 or 4 billion dollar business that's been around for 50 or 100 years, legally you will be outmuscled very quickly if you make some mistakes. So you absolutely have to make sure that you have a contract that works for both parties. There's risk from their side as well. It would be a lot easier for billion-dollar businesses to do business with other huge companies who have all the legal protections in place and maybe have all the experience. However, what we were able to do is build a product that had a niche that no other large supplier could manufacture or copy. So these large companies came to deal with us, but they did want to try and encompass us and manage us through a strict set of legal documents. And that's really where the commercial role came out of. So we had to handle both sales and the full commercial side on the legal angle to make sure that both ourselves and our customers were happy with it.
That's really interesting, Will. It's a really great learning point for many earlier stage software businesses who, might be inclined to think that it's all about getting to closing the sale and doing that as quickly as possible. But from what you're saying, it's really, really important that you have the right contract in place when you're doing that in order to protect everybody.
Well, it is, and large companies impose warranties on their suppliers, and there's also limitations that they want to make as high as possible on the amount of damages that they can claim. Clearly, if you're running something that's business critical, such as food safety management, if that goes wrong and they have to make a massive amount of recalls, that could rapidly run into millions of dollars within a day. If we were not careful with our documentation and we were liable for all of those damages, we would be finished in one legal action. So we have to be very careful to limit our own liability, but do that in a way that our clients don't think that we're either amateur or incompetent, just being reasonable. So the commercial role requires a mixture of what works commercially from a numbers perspective, but also what works from a legal and management perspective.
How does Safefood 360 go about acquiring a new customer, and what's the type of duration of the sales cycle?
Well, we're very lucky in the sense that the Safefood product as a piece of regulatory and compliance software, perhaps a little bit like accounting software or company secretarial software, is not a nice to have for companies. It's a must have. You have to do food safety management one way or another if you want to manufacture anywhere in the civilized world. And you can choose to do that on paper or spreadsheets, or as often happens, you start thinking as a technical manager or a food safety manager within these sort of businesses, there must be a better way. So they look on the internet, and they find other companies like Safefood 360 who provide some kind of regulatory and compliance environment for food. And then they contact us. So we're in the very fortunate position that since 2012, which is pretty much 8 years now, we have never had to make a cold call, which, as any salesperson will know, is a fantastic place to be. So we have inbound leads coming in. They're not all great quality, but the point is there are people that are interested in us. Probably we get about one a day. Of different sizes. So some are non-enterprise, by which we mean less than probably $250 million. So anything up to about 250 million. Most of them are in that category, and we get the odd enterprise customer, which means above that size in revenue or more than 5 sites. Then as a sales team, we qualify them. Quite a lot of them do fall by the wayside, but being able to say no, we don't have a good fit for your requirements, is actually almost as important as being able to go in and try and sell to them. The reason that I say that is because our sales cycle is reasonably long and complex. So we have an initial requirements conversation where we weed out people that we don't think we can meet their requirements, or the other way around. Then we have to demonstrate the software, which may take up to 3 or 4 different sessions of an hour or so online. Quite often people will then want something that we call a proof of concept. And we think a proof of concept is one of the real key differentiators, and one of the things that I would advise any startup company to think about putting in as part of their sales process. What we do there is we take their existing programs. So any food company has existing set of programs around food safety management, and these might be bits of paper, Word documents, Excel documents. We take those and we load them up into Safefood, and we put some of their data in it. And then we train them how to use it and leave it with them for a month or so to play with. So the difference between that and a trial of the software, the concept of a generic trial of a software where you might be working with ABC Food Company Limited imaginary data, they're poles apart. So if I am able to see my own data or some of it in Safefood and compare that to my current manual or semi-automated systems, I can see the gap between Safefood up here and what I'm currently doing there. And that gap is equivalent to value. And then the question is, well, what is that value worth to me as a company? And this is where the pricing discussion comes in, where we try and explain why Safefood costs what it does and what the saving and the business case for our clients will be if they choose to deploy our system. So typically the sales cycle takes between 3 to 6 months maximum.
Okay, Will, I suspect I'm going to be referring many Dublin BIC clients to this video to hear what you've just said there, and outlining the kind of rigor that you bring to qualifying leads, to managing an effective trial of the product, and ensuring that happens in a way that's most likely to lead to a commercially positive outcome for everyone. I think that there's really great lessons in there for many of the startup enterprises that we talk to. On another subject, tell me, how do you go about recruiting and motivating and managing a really high performance salesperson?
That's a good question, Martin. So Safefood as a product is a technical sell. So it's a science-based product. Um, Clearly, it's an IT solution, but you can't really sell it if you don't understand the discipline of food safety. So you really need to have training as a food technologist, microbiologist, quality manager, technical manager, because when people buy from you, they need to feel confident that you understand their requirements and that you're going to be able to deliver a solution that is going to work for them. Now, clearly, if I'm selling, say, accounting software, the fact that I work for Sage or IBM or Oracle or SAP has that cachet. It gives a prospect the comfort that the company selling the solution has all the necessary credentials to deliver what they want. And much as I love and admire Safefood, the fact of the matter is that our brand doesn't have that cachet as a small Dublin-based business with global food companies that those kind of tech giants have. So we have to rely on competence that we transmit during the sales process to make people think, well, I've never heard of these guys. They have some good customers and they certainly understand the subject, the domain, and their solution looks good. So having said that, we don't have any salespeople that are generalist sales guys. So for example, a great case study would be our US territory manager. He's actually a quality manager by background, and he was our very first customer in the US. So he was the technical manager of that particular business. It was a canning business, and he used Safefood for a year as a standard customer. And at the end of the year, he actually spoke to us and informally and said, I really like your software. Is there any chance I could come and work for you? So we employed him. And by background, he's not a sales guy at all. But that actually in some ways makes him more effective because in the sort of poacher gamekeeper type environment, our customers or our prospects, as they are when he's talking to them, feel comfortable that here's someone who's actually from their side of the fence, who's used the product as a user and liked it enough to go and work for the company and is still there 8 years later. So that's a key part of the sales process. Now I do a lot of the enterprise sales myself, and I really know very little about food safety apart from what I have learnt over the last few years here. So for the demonstration, proof of concept, all the technical pieces, I bring in a product specialist and a domain expert because that makes me look more professional, more competent, that I know the limits of my knowledge and that I'm not embarrassed or afraid to be able to bring someone in to complement the commercial discussion that I'm having around why they should consider implementing Safefood. So you do need those type of salespeople as well who are hungry and numbers driven in exactly the same way as any startup business would. However, it's important to stress that it's most unlikely that they are going to learn enough about the science and the domain to be able to talk food safety as an insider with our prospects. And in that regard, we have a team of product specialists who support us when we're making sales calls to make sure that we don't come unstuck and sound just like pushy amateur salespeople trying to get people to buy our product.
I really like that you've called out there that it's okay as the chief commercial officer to say, yeah, there's limits to my knowledge, and that's why I've got some expertise here in the room with me. I think that's a great message for people to take away. Even scarier than recruiting your first salesperson is recruiting your chief commercial officer for a small startup software business, which is typically founded by the software technologist or the person with the deep domain knowledge in the area in which you're operating. And it can be, and typically one of those people is the first salesperson in the business. But at what point does a startup software business need to take on the sales director or the chief commercial officer, and what can they try to do to ensure that they do it right?
That's a very good question, and a difficult one to answer, Martin, because there's no clear answer to that applies across all different sizes and scopes of startup. I suppose the best way I can answer that is by sharing with you the Safefood experience. So the two founders of Safefood were by background a food technologist and a computer software developer. And it's the combination of their two skills, the domain knowledge and the IT knowledge, that took the contents of the CEO's brain, i.e. the food safety knowledge, and put it in a solution. But they both recognized that despite their two skills and the ability to bring that together to generate a solution and to make some sales, what they didn't have the experience of was building a sales team, building a sales plan, and building a model for sustainable growth. So in terms of our trajectory, the first person that we hired was Chris, our territory manager in the US, because at that stage, what was required was to get some early sales in, understand how to look after customers. Our churn rate then was higher, much higher than it is now. I wouldn't say we lost pretty much every other one that we signed up, but we signed up a lot of people. They didn't renew their contracts. As you probably know, in the SaaS world, any churn rate less than 10% is quite good. Safefood's churn rate at the moment, 3.7% annually. And it's taken us a while to get there. In the early years, people signed up, they didn't like the product, we didn't know how to support it properly. So it was a very iterative process. It was a process of trial and error. And that applied exactly to the sales cycle as well. We got people in the door, but we weren't able to make them as sticky as they needed to be to stay with us for many years. However, after probably 2 or 3 years of trying different ways of selling, different pricing models, we eventually came up with the model that we still use today, which is to say the software is around $15,000 per site per year. So it's pitched at that level. Initially, we started trying to sell it for $250 per month on a credit card with no implementation at all. And that was a disaster because no one could use it because it was far too complicated to set up. So once we'd established what was going to work, the question was, well, how do we scale that? And that was really the stage, 2015, 2016, when we started having the discussions around, should I perhaps switch from being on the outside to being on the inside, and coming in to fulfill that commercial role. Now, it's not to say that every company wants to go down the route of one of the early figures in the business becoming the commercial person. There are always people from the outside that can fulfill that role. However, I suppose my advice would be startup businesses need to recognize from a sales and commercial perspective when they've reached that inflection point, i.e. when they've trialed and errored a number of different ways of selling the solution, and they've eventually settled on something that actually seems to work, that seems to be sticky, that seems to resonate with customers. And the challenge then is, how do we now do this at scale? And scale doesn't just mean taking on lots of salespeople, because lots of salespeople with no management, no direction, and no plans are like a herd of cats, difficult to manage and ineffective. So it's knowing when that point is, and at that stage, looking around the market and finding someone who's got the authority and the experience, not necessarily in that market, but in the in that sector rather, but in the technology world that the company is operating in, to build on the initial success that the founders have worked out and then scale it. So that's really, I think, all that I can say on that. There is no straightforward answer, but there are plenty of indications when that point has arrived, and when people should start considering bringing someone in to manage that side of the business.
Well, that really resonates with me, because the situation that we find quite often is that you have those founders not from a sales background. They find the whole idea of sales really scary and unattractive, and they, on day one, if they have the money to do so, they would like to take on that sales director and just, I wouldn't say delegate, more like abdicate all responsibility for that to them. But the forming process that you described there, where you made some mistakes and you find out what works and what doesn't work, hasn't happened. So they don't even know the kind of role that they're bringing that salesperson into. And it's so much more effective if the founders can do some of the hard yards and some of the discovery, and even experience some pain before they bring in that person into a senior sales role. So
Yeah.
that really makes sense to me.
You're absolutely right. And of course, there's a risk for founders where they do what you've just described, which is take on the senior salesperson or the commercial person right at the beginning, which is that firstly, they probably don't have the money to employ all three of them at the start of the business. And the commercial person is probably not going to get results initially. And I'm afraid I know this from my own experience in previous operations where I've been in early as the commercial person and not survived that process of discovery where we were working out pricing, markets, route to market, and so on. And I think it's important for the founders, as you say, to have done the stone turning over process, which is long and painful. But when they have finally arrived at a point where they said, we think this model works, we now need someone to take it over for us and deliver it to the market, that's the time to bring in someone who can work on what they've established.
Very good. Well, I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you, and having done so, I have no difficulty seeing why it's the case that Safefood 360 is in most of the continents in the world and is working with billion-dollar companies. So thank you very much for the insights that you've given us. Will Parker, Chief Commercial Officer with Safefood 360. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much. And thank you also to BIC for your support over these many years.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.